Co-op games to me are one of gaming's greatest feats, a genre that used to have a major chokehold on our favourite studios, and it's for good reasons too. When studios make the choice to include co-op modes in their games, or even allow the ability to play an entire campaign in co-op, they're opening up their game to an entirely different perspective. Whether it's a group of friends from all around the globe, or just one friend that sits next to you on the sofa for some sweet nostalgic split-screen gaming, the experience you have with a game is flipped on its head completely in comparison to if you played that game solo. Take Lethal Company for example. You can play this game solo, and it is, in my opinion, a whole lot scarier to do so, because playing it with 2 or 3 others makes it a lot less scary and a lot more funny. Co-op games the likes of Lethal Company, Repo, or even Peak, which released just this year, have been making a bit of a resurgence recently. But for me, I'm a huge fan of the classics, the OGs, if you will. I'm talking about the Resident Evils, specifically Resident Evil 5. This game was very obviously built with co-op in mind. I mean, from the beginning to the very end of the game, you're never without your partner Sheva Alomar, and there are a ton of obstacles and paths along the way that would literally prevent you from progressing if it was just Chris Redfield all by himself. That's right, he can punch a volcanic boulder with his bare fists, but he can't open a door without Sheva's help. That's why she's my favourite. But I know exactly what you're thinking. You don't have any friends, you're a loner, and you'll never be able to play co-op. To which I say, first off, fuck you. Second off, alright, fair enough, you got me with that one. And third off, I absolutely can play with myself. I play with myself all the time. I don't need friends for that, right? Well, if your answer to that was yes you do, you're actually wrong. Thanks to my extremely large brain and inability to get rid of things I don't use anymore, I was able to connect my PS5 controller to my main PC via Bluetooth, and then to my dusty old gaming laptop via USB-C like some kind of potato battery science experiment. This, along with a second copy of Resident Evil 5 on a brand new Steam account, would allow me to control both Chris and Sheva seamlessly at the exact same time with the exact same button inputs. This, of course, means if I aim my gun as Chris, Sheva aims too. If I turn my camera on one perspective, it turns in the exact same way on the other, and if I run forward, we pretty much run side by side in tandem. So, I've proved it's possible to play with myself, which finally begs the question, is it possible to beat Resident Evil 5 whilst playing with myself? To make sure I got the full experience of playing with myself, I waited till it was dark outside, made sure I was home alone, and sat down in front of my computer, ready to play with myself. Kicking it off with Chapter 1-1, we make both characters run side by side until we reach our first encounter with a recently infected Majini. When the cutscene ends, Sheva and Chris will be positioned perfectly to allow this to happen. Both of their guns were aimed directly at the Majini, so that one pull of the trigger resulted in 2 shots at the same time, instantly stunning and flooring him. Annoyingly, this can lead to wasting ammo if an enemy moves or if our aim isn't lined up perfectly, but we'll address this issue later on. While Chris has a talk with this brick wall, Sheva dives out of the window to explore the area, and then we make Chris jump out too. Fortunately, we don't actually need both of them to be side by side to trigger a lot of the checkpoints and cutscenes in this game, and some of them will even teleport you to be in the correct spots at the end of a cutscene. So, even though Chris is fumbling around over here, Sheva can still trigger the cutscene, and then they're both automatically positioned together to allow the game to continue. Inside the hut and safe from a horde of Majini, we grab some stuff with Chris, leaving Sheva to wander around before opening the gate together and proceeding to our first big challenge, the assembly area. If you've played Resident Evil 5 before, you know how much of a pain in the ass this area can be. You're trapped in a house with enemies pouring in left, right and centre, and just as it feels like you've got things under control, the executioner decides to pay you a visit, and even more enemies flood to the vicinity. That being said, I have full control over both characters. I don't have to rely on AI Sheva or a friend who's maybe not as good at video games, and I also have experience speedrunning this game. So, to avoid falling at the first hurdle and seeing a death on the results screen, I avoid the executioner and take both Chris and Sheva up these ladders and all the way to the very top of this building. Not only would this keep me safe from the executioner who can't climb ladders or anything like that, but it also keeps enemies rolling in at a slow and steady pace instead of surrounding us from all angles, And there's even some goodies in the shape of grenades up here, a nice little treat we'll be holding on to until later. After about 6 minutes of keeping the Majini at bay and preserving precious ammo by forcing Sheva to hold ammo instead of her gun, Kirk shows up to save the day, blowing the door off its hinges and providing us with an exit. In Chapter 1-2, our goal is to head to the deal coordinates where a bioweapons black market deal is expected to go down. Now, in this area, we can take our time to neutralize the Majini and search for resources, but given the circumstances, it felt like a better idea to speedrun our way through it, avoiding as many enemies as possible. We did get separated at one point due to the geometry of the level and collision with enemies, but to solve this, I just sent Chris to the gate so that we could control Sheva without any fuss thereafter. In the next area, following the cutscene with the girl in distress known as Allison, Chris and Sheva load in facing different directions, which would lead to this section being a bit more difficult to complete than usual. Whilst I show you how I managed to escape this area and head to the furnace room, I just wanted to talk about Allison a bit more because her story as far as we know it is actually quite detailed and, in my opinion, could make a really great standalone piece of media, like a short series, film, or maybe even a spin-off game. Allison is not a Kijuju native. She was born overseas and moved here in late 2008 with her boyfriend, who got a job at the region's quarry following a civil war which resulted in a need for foreign workers. After arriving in Kijuju, Allison noticed an increase in low-profile insurgent activity, such as political posters, as well as unexplained animal attacks, which left her scared to leave their hotel at times. When she was willing to leave, she would frequent a bar that white settlers and foreign workers would visit. This is where she would meet Adam, another quarry worker of white settler ancestry. Yes, this is the only photo we have of him. Apparently he loves beer and women. In December 2008, Allison's boyfriend went to work and never came back, and she was told this was because he was very busy. From January 2009, political instability in Kijuju became very clear, and on the 15th, while Allison was at the bar with Adam, a fight broke out between Kijujuan nationalists, insurgents, and foreign workers, and so Allison took shelter with Adam to hide from rioters, leaving him the next morning in search of her boyfriend. Eventually, she was forced from her hotel due to an increase of attacks from insurgents and civilian recruits, and took shelter again with Adam, who this time kept her inside at all times for her safety. Being stuck inside 24/7 would soon take its toll on Allison, and after the army sealed Kijuju behind a massive quarantine wall, she was frustrated that Adam did nothing to help her escape Kijuju and left to find safety and a possible leave from Kijuju. As we now know, this obviously did not pan out how she had hoped, as she was eventually captured by insurgents, infected with the Type 2 Plaga, and eliminated by Chris and Sheva. Or at least she would have been if we weren't playing the game in such a fucked up way. After making our way through the abandoned building and towards the furnace facility, we finally come face to face with our first boss, the Ouroboros test subject. If you don't know much about Resident Evil 5 lore, this monstrosity is actually, or was actually, a completely normal resident of Kijuju, who was captured and experimented on to be the first ever test subject for the Ouroboros virus. The test clearly did not go as planned, as the subject was consumed by the virus and turned into a meaty spaghetti. Normally this fight is really simple, you just lead it to the incinerator, pull the lever to activate it, and it burns into a gloopy mess. But given how hard it was to control both Chris and Sheva at the same time, it took me a few too many tries, as my timing would be just off and it would escape the incinerator. On my fourth attempt though, we finally trapped it inside to kill him off and advanced to the deal coordinates, where our dealer Ricardo Irving was already 2 steps ahead and on his way out. 2-1 gave us a new weapon, the MP5, and then sent us headfirst into a maze of enemies, which introduced us to the Type 2 Plaga's infected dogs. Due to getting stuck on some collision here and there, Sheva ended up separated from Chris, but I eventually managed to get them back together by shoving Chris into a wall over and over. This first half of the chapter was basically just a running simulator. I didn't intend on fighting any of the enemies because it was entirely optional to an extent, so instead I preserved my ammo, only using it when a path needed to be cleared, such as when the truck is approaching on the bridge, for example. I also took the time to pick up another weapon in the port town, the S75 rifle, before proceeding to the old town where we would be attempting a speedrun trick. Remember those grenades I picked up in 1-1? Well, we're going to use them here to take a shortcut through a padlocked metal door. Normally, you would have to clear the area, launch Sheva to the other building, and then fight your way through a horde of enemies to break the padlock for Chris. However, if we bounce a grenade off of this sign, it'll land directly in front of the gate and destroy the padlock immediately without needing to put Sheva in danger. Sheva can then trigger the checkpoint for the next area, allowing us to restart and warp to her location. Then we faced our very first Chainsaw Majini. I remember when I was a kid, I would always dread this part. For some reason, the idea of being chased by something that not only had a ton of health, but also had a weapon that could one-shot you was terrifying and... oh, okay, wait, I think I just realized why it was terrifying. Either way, it was really scary, but fortunately, years of experience with horror games and a pretty good idea of how to get past this guy meant that I was prepared, both mentally and physically. We still had a surplus of grenades left over, so I started by throwing them as both Chris and Sheva at the exact same time, with the hopes of dealing double the damage per throw and beating him as quick as we could. Some poor timing did lead to Sheva taking a pretty hefty blow, but a few bullets to the head and one spin kick later, and he fell to his knees for one last time. With the guard's key firmly in our pocket, we finished the rest of the enemies off, had a look around for some resources, and proceeded to the end of the chapter after that one really over-the-top cutscene. The start of the next chapter was fairly simple. It was just another case of avoiding enemies and heading to the next area, only this time we hopped over some trains, cleared some trip mines, and took Chris for a ride down the track while Sheva followed. In the mines, the two loaded in side by side, but I managed to get Chris ahead of Sheva, so with that in mind, I had Sheva pick up the lantern so that we could see where we're going and light the way ahead with Chris in front to protect her. We did end up swapped around at some point due to collision with enemies, but I used this gem to get them closer together and eventually it sorted itself out. Once we reached this valve controlled gate, Chris raised it for Sheva while she danced in circles and vice versa. Unfortunately, due to the sheer chaos of being surrounded by enemies in this area, the two got separated again, so I did what I could to get them back together, which did eventually get us to the elevator and up to the surface. After a brief encounter with Irving, we embraced the PS3 era piss filter, grabbed the beloved Dragunov rifle, and got back to our favourite hobby, running. The Dragunov rifle specifically was important to us at this stage because while it is statistically weaker than the S75 we picked up earlier, it has a much faster rate of fire and can hold more bullets per magazine, meaning it would be really useful for us in the end of chapter fight. That, and I actually forgot I had the S75 because I stored it away earlier. After taking care of some of the enemies up the hill and requiring teamwork to push this thing out of the way, we dropped down to the boss battle shaped area for, well, a boss battle. The Popo Karimu is essentially a big bat infected with a variant of the last Plagas parasite, and it has a pretty big weak spot on its underside. As you take control of Chris, the bat is already exposing its weak spot, so we can immediately use our rifle to pump 2 bullets into it, making it fall to the ground and writhe. Once in this position, we can head over to it and unload the rest of our magazine before spraying it down with our SMG. Sometimes this is enough to kill it right away, but this time we weren't so lucky. I tried to position the two away from each other so that it would turn to Sheva and allow Chris to attack, but at some point it actually knocked Sheva off of the edge. I sent Chris over there to pick her up, but instead was again knocked off, so Sheva had to climb up without help so that she could then help Chris up. Yeah, I don't really know what's going on anymore either. After some more running around and repositioning, we eventually got a rifle shot off whilst it was in the air, and that did manage to put an end to it, launching us right into 2-3. This chapter was, of course, the mounted turret chapter, and not much really needs to be said about this, except that sometimes it felt like Chris was aiming faster than Sheva, which could be due to slightly different controller sensitivity settings now that I think about it, but that is pretty much it. The two would shoot at the exact same targets, almost in sync, and there wasn't much else to discuss. We beat the big ugly giant thing and moved on. We were now in the marshlands and things were starting to ramp up in difficulty slightly. Our goal to progress to the next area was to collect the slate fragments scattered between different locations, and so I set 2 strict rules. The first one was that Chris would always drive because Sheva had the most ammo at the time and so could do a better job at fending off enemies if needed. The second one was that Sheva would stay with the boat. If it was unnecessary to send 2 people to one location, then it would make things simpler to keep her with the boat to avoid getting split up. These rules definitely definitely made things easier, though I will admit I did have a bit of a brain fart and struggled to get Sheva on the boat without Chris at first. There were a few times where I died during this section, and honestly I'm not even that surprised. The alligators were impossible to avoid sometimes, and I always struggled to get past them, even under normal circumstances, but also there were times where the enemies were just extremely overwhelming, which resulted in a challenging escape, often leading to death. An important thing to remember here though is that we did pick up the rocket launcher to use in a different chapter. The village area was actually a lot easier than I expected. I did mess up here and there by triggering the spike traps and even wasting my rocket launcher, but after a few tactical restarts, we actually got Sheva over the bridge without taking too much damage, and before we knew it, we were flying through the sky to chapter 3-2. The start of 3-2 was fairly straightforward, with the main challenge being to clear out a bunch of enemies so that Sheva could pull a crank which would carry us across the alligator infested waters, where we could then lower the drawbridge. A quick checkpoint restart warps us at the end of the bridge, and from there we make our way to the oil field. This area was honestly really fun for me. Again, it's a part of the game I stressed over growing up, so tackling it in a completely new way almost brought back that nostalgic enjoyment. On my first attempt, I basically tried to speedrun the whole thing, but given the circumstances, we essentially just got swarmed by enemies, and Sheva ended up dying to a chainsaw machine. On my second attempt, I took the time to eliminate all the enemies one by one, even taking care of the first chainsaw Magini and bagging some treasure. This did, however, mean that we had started to run out of ammo, and so in the next area where we bump into our friend and BSAA agent Josh, we were essentially trying to hold down the area with next to nothing. Lucky for us, the elevator opened up just in time to avoid an encounter with the big man Magini. Yes, that's what they're officially called. And we headed up to the second floor. Whilst Josh is trying to open up this door, a lot more enemies started to pour in, including a chainsaw Magini, but we were able to just hold this line for a short while, and eventually the door opened. To finish off the chapter, we headed to the dock to find Irving slowly sailing away, almost comedically, and suddenly we were against the clock to escape the oil field before it blows up. Admittedly, this was a lot harder than some of our other running segments due to enemies, gates and trip mines blocking the way, but we did make it to the boat with time to spare, and we were on our way into chapter 3-3. Once we were on Josh's little boat, we were on our way to chase down Irving's big ship, and on the way there we had to stop and open some water gates. The first gate only required one lever to be pulled, so we left Sheva at the boat whilst Chris made a mad dash over to the lever, opening the gate and swiftly returning, but the second gate required the both of them to pull a lever each at the exact same time. So we took the quickest route to the levers, which is immediately right off of the boat, lined the two of them up and pulled them together to open the final water gate. Now it was time to get this Irving. After boarding Irving's ship and watching the Plagas parasite take over his body, transforming him into this huge Pokemon-shaped freak, we took a hold of the ship's conveniently placed mounted weapons. At first, it felt like this was going pretty smoothly. My first shot with this mounted rocket launcher made direct contact with Irving's weak spot, but very shortly after, things started to go south. As it turns out, it's pretty difficult controlling both characters at once when there's a chance that only one of them has to avoid an incoming attack, whilst also operating a mounted turret. What I'm trying to say is I fucked up a lot, and Sheva took a fair few hits before I figured out what I was meant to be doing. But even then, Chris took a lot of damage too. It was brutal. Once I'd got my bearings though, Irving eventually took enough damage to move into his final phase, where he stayed at the foot of the boat and exposed himself. Not like that. He exposed his biggest weak spot, which was actually just straight up him, allowing us to drill bullets into him until finally it was over. Irving, the main reason we even came to Kajuju, is dead. Normally that would mean it's mission over, game's finished, everybody go home, but he did actually give us a piece of vital information. Jill Valentine, who Chris assumed was dead, is actually still alive. So now the new mission was to find Jill Valentine.
All your answers await ahead, Chris. In that cave. If you can survive long enough to get them.
Arriving at the boat dock in the cave, we were pretty low on health from the Irving fight. It was at this point I decided to almost completely fill Sheva's inventory with first aid, leaving her with an empty pistol and a slot for anything she might be able to pick up on the way. Doing it this way meant that we were no longer wasting ammo, since it was almost impossible to have them shoot at separate times, and Chris was now the powerhouse accompanied by a medic. Chapter 4-1 introduces us to a new Magini, the Endipaya Magini, and their ancient underground maze-like city littered with booby traps and giant beams of focused light, which were pretty dangerous. After opening this door, deactivating the flaming balls, and taking a good few hits as Chris, we made our way through everybody's favorite unnecessary QTE cutscene, and then entered this giant puzzle area where we would have to split up, pull chains, and reveal pathways to the next area. There isn't much to talk about here, since it was just another area where we would leave one of them at a pulley chain and have the other one run to the corresponding chain. For the most part, it was pretty smooth sailing, with the only caveat being we took the time to clear out these enemies so that they didn't cause us problems later on. Once we revealed the final pathway, another infected bat dropped in like a Fortnite player, but fortunately for us, we did not have to fight it at all. We were able to just run up the stairs to the exit and watch it get crushed by the walls and pillars it knocks down. While defeating it ourselves would have granted us a nice bit of treasure, it just wasn't worth the effort when we needed to conserve our resources. Once we head through the door, we get a short cutscene about Albert Wesker's intentions with the Ouroboros project.
The plan is in its final stages. I will not tolerate delays. I believe I should thank you, Spencer.
Followed by a chapter end screen. Chapter 4-2 is the one with the giant beams of light that I mentioned earlier, but it's also a chapter that is absolutely filled with tactical restart exploits, and you'll see what I mean by that shortly. First, it was time to collect 3 different emblems to open the path ahead, starting with the sea emblem. My plan here was to just ignore all the enemies as I run from emblem to emblem, but after struggling to navigate through the enemies, the maze-like paths, and the deadly light beams, I realized this wasn't going to be so easy, and so I restarted the level to get my shit together. After grabbing the sea emblem this time, I headed back to the main door we were trying to open and inserted the emblem so that we had a checkpoint we were able to walk back to if we needed to restart before the next one. From there, we headed over to this broken bridge where we could launch Sheva over to grab the sky emblem, and I did actually have to try this one a couple of times because I kept struggling to get Sheva back in one piece, but when we did eventually make it, we headed straight for the earth emblem, back to the door, and restarted the checkpoint immediately because, well, Chris was taking a bit of a beating. After opening the door and heading inside the pyramid, we were face to face with what I thought would be the hardest part of this run, the light beam puzzles. I thought I was going to struggle with this for hours and hours, but in actuality it was way easier than expected. I just shoved one of them in a corner on the raised platform and let the other one do the work pretty much. It was a little harder on the last puzzle because there wasn't a corner to cram into, but it didn't take long before we were on the platform heading out of the pyramid and into the next chapter. With only 6 chapters remaining and a whole lot of lore slowly being unveiled, we head into the progenitor virus house where we have our first encounters with the Lickers and a goat. At first, I thought it would be a good idea to try and remain silent around this first Licker, but he seemingly already knows of our presence and attacked Sheva, so instead I just ran straight to the door and opened it as quick as I could. The next area does allow us to sneak past them initially, but as we're required to quite loudly kick a door open, it only bought us a little bit of time while we waited for the elevator to arrive. Once we got to the experimental facility, Chris finds out that Jill is in fact alive and possibly being held in some kind of cryostasis chamber, but before we can find her, out of nowhere a giant enemy spider is looming over us. Not to worry though, because despite its size, with all the money we've been saving since the beginning of the game, we can just... yeah, simple as that. Once the spider is down and Jill's pod is found, we discover that she's actually missing, ending chapter 5-1 with a goal: to get some answers.
It's time we get some answers.
If any of you have seen my previous RE5 videos, you'll know what my favourite part about 5-2 is, and if you haven't, Well, let me show you. This chapter introduces you to Majini's brandishing AKs, which of course makes them lethal at long range. However, it also means that they're, for the most part, too busy holding a gun to grab you or attack with their hands, stuff like that. So, for the most of this chapter, if you're happy to tank a fair bit of damage here and there, you can sort of just run past everyone. It's crazy, I know, but it works, and it's my go-to strat to beat this chapter fast. It was a little harder to do controlling both players with the same controller, and at one point I did actually have to return to Sheva and save her life when they got separated, but it really didn't take long at all to make it to the elevator and up to the next area, where again we just ran past a bunch of enemies, in this case lickers, and proceeded onwards. I like to call this section of the chapter Conveyor Belt Central because of, well, the sheer number of conveyor belts. That being said, I would also call it really fucking annoying because there are just so many enemies, your movement is slow on the belts, and if you're trying to control both characters at once, well, it will be really fucking annoying. I did have to restart once because we took lots of damage and I was just having a really bad time in general, but after a bit of running about, we did make it through the first lot of conveyor belts and were of course rewarded with an assault rifle. Before we could head through the next conveyor belts, we had to first turn on the power due to a box blocking our way, and in doing so, confront a mantis-like BOW known as the Reaper, which is a sick name, by the way. After taking care of the Reaper, again, sick name, we headed down the final conveyor belts and into the Ouroboros research facility. At this point, the cutscene allows us to see the process of the Ouroboros virus taking over a test subject, while Excella eagerly watches, but she wouldn't be gleeful for long because... yeah, I don't know. This shit's just easy with a rocket launcher, I guess. "5-3, much like the last chapter, just involved a lot of running from A to B, except this time it was best to defeat the enemies we encountered because we were going to be tied down to one spot for a short while. This meant killing Majini, Reapers, and even a big man Majini while waiting for this platform to take us across. Once we made it to the other side, we headed through the store and found ourselves back at the experimental facility where all the pods with people in are. This part of the chapter didn't play out any different to other playthroughs. Sheva just basically had to try her best not to get shot, while Chris had to use the rifle to defeat the Majini holding down the brakes to the platform. Once the enemies were defeated, we pocketed a rotten egg for God knows what reason, and made our way to the Monarch Room entrance. To lower the bridge to the Monarch Room, Chris had to go up and around the structure and push this crate of debris in order to get inside the control room building. A licker did bother us at this point, but focusing on the crate was faster than fighting, so we did that, jumped down, unlocked the door, and Sheva lowered the bridge. Of course, focusing on the crate rather than the enemies would quickly come to bite us in the ass because it resulted in us being swarmed by lickers and physically unable to leave without a bit of maneuvering and damage taken. Once the bridge was lowered, we saved Chris's life and headed into the Monarch Room where we would find Excella, Wesker, and of course, Jill Valentine.
So slow to catch on.
While Wesker told us about how much time we have to play,
7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
we headed immediately to the right of the room, which would trigger a cutscene and open the rest of the area up. My goal here wasn't to waste ammo by shooting Wesker, waste health by taking damage, or any of that stupid stuff. My goal was to collect the magnum that's hidden in a stone coffin, along with some treasure, and wait out Wesker's patience as he will eventually get bored and leave us with just Jill. The Jill fight took a very long time to finish, mainly because of the way I went about it. The quickest way to do this is to shoot the device on her chest a few times before attempting to rip it off over and over again, because the shooting does enough damage to reduce the number of attempts required. To preserve ammo though, and make things a little easier, albeit longer, with the dual control situation, I opted for the entreat and restrain option, where Chris basically just yells at Jill about their past, making her freak out a bit and frying the device slightly, at which point she's stunned and can be restrained, allowing Sheva to try and pull the device away. I counted, and it took about 17 attempts before the device finally came loose and was removed, which was just shy of 10 minutes in total. Definitely not a speedrun strat, that's for sure. Once the device was removed, Jill tells us about Wesker's plan for world domination using the Ouroboros virus, and we dive straight into the final act of the game, Chapter 6.
You're our only hope to survive this.
In 6-1, we find ourselves on a huge tanker with Wesker, Excella, and dozens of Majini on board. Instead of running headfirst into these enemies, I decided to use the rifle to take them out one by one, because some of them have grenades strapped to their chest and others even throw grenades directly at you. A few of them also have a fair bit of armor that our weapons can't penetrate, so it was best to isolate those fights before they got too close and ultimately ate our ammo or blew us up. When they were dealt with, I did in fact then speed my way past the other enemies because these ones spawned in slowly one after the other, making it a little bit easier for us to navigate past them and avoid their attacks. Chris and Sheva did get separated around here, but I knew there was a checkpoint coming up anyway, so I just sent Chris in the right direction with Sheva bumping into walls and hit a tactical restart. After pushing some debris out of the way and dropping down into this area, Sheva gets trapped inside a giant cage and Chris gets swarmed by Magini. Fortunately, a few of these have grenades strapped to their chest again, so we're able to kill them by shooting those grenades, and when the last enemy with the shield is left, we throw a grenade at him to blow him up, instantly revealing the keycard that would then be required to free Sheva. The reason we use a grenade here instead of shooting him is because this specific enemy, once defeated with a gun, mutates into a much tougher variant of the Plaga who can quite literally one-shot you if he gets too close, so blowing him up before that can happen is the preferred option. Using the keycard, we head through this gate and up to the crane to free Sheva, then we head back down to be faced with a miniature puzzle. One that needs to be done quickly since we're being pursued by two big man Magini. The goal was to shoot each other's buttons on the platforms to raise each other up, but it didn't need to be done at the same time, so I just put Sheva on her platform and raised her up with Chris, and then the other way round to get them both to the next area. Once that was done, we headed inside the boat to confront Excella. After the cutscene, we found ourselves in a room filled to the brim with Magini, most of them wielding guns, but for now we were just going to ignore them and run straight past and to the other side of the room through a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, we climb up to trigger a checkpoint, allowing us to perform a tactical restart which despawns the enemies. This despawn trick was pretty much essential because up next was our first encounter with a Gatling gun Magini. Seriously, the creativity with these names is astounding. To beat this guy, we just used Chris's rifle to deal as much damage as we could, shooting him in the head a few times, punching him, getting punched, almost dying, until eventually we quite literally punched his lights out. Defeating him gave us one of the two keycards required to progress to the next area, with the other one being in this safe over here. In the next area were a couple of rocket launcher Maginis who managed to blow themselves up. Passing through, we took the elevator up to close 6-1. 6-2 puts us in a QTE after Excella mutates into this horrible gargantuan Ouroboros creature, and what I find insane is that Wesker seemingly knew this would happen to her because not only did he leave her alone after injection, but he also made sure there were a pile of dead Magini nearby for her to consume and in turn grow larger and larger. Absolutely messed up stuff, but it's Wesker we're talking about, so is anyone really surprised? Upon completing the QTE, we end up inside the ship again, this time trying to find a way to the bridge deck so that we can take her down. There's not much to say about this bit since we just ran from the entrance to the exit with a few enemies in between, but once we were out on the bridge deck and ready to fight her, we made sure to use the satellite laser targeting device to take out her cores. Between shots, while the laser gun recharged, we used Chris to take out any of these little blobs, and not before long, Excella was down, ending chapter 6-2 and sending us headfirst into the final chapter of the game, 6-3. The chapter starts with Jill calling us to tell us about Wesker's weakness, an overdose of the serum that keeps him stable. We also see his exact location as he looms over his super cool doomsday plane in a hangar, so Chris and Sheva push forth to save the world, or in their words, give it a shot.
Let's give it a shot.
The beginning section of the engine room is very easy as we don't actually have to fight any of these enemies just yet. We can just run past them to this lever, which begins opening the first bulkhead to the next area, and then we can get our fight on. Once the bulkhead is open, we take out the enemies with guns and rockets before heading to the levers to open the second bulkhead. Fortunately for us, this also triggers a checkpoint, and I'm saying that because once the bulkhead starts opening, two Reapers spawn in and approach from either side of you, as well as two Gatling gun Maginis in the next area once it opens. Normally, I can get these Reapers out of the way fairly quickly with a few well-placed shots, but for some reason this time, it didn't quite go as planned. Then, once I did get them out of the way, I just struggled against the Gatling gun Maginis anyways and pressed the restart button, only to realize there was no checkpoint between the Reapers and the Maginis. So I had to try again and again until eventually we finally got them both down and were ready for the hardest part of the game so far. Albert Wesker was a pain in my ass. Honestly, I've always struggled with this Wesker fight. It just feels like every time you try to restrain him so that Sheva can inject the serum, he just breaks free at the last moment and smacks you in the face again. My very long history of struggling to beat Wesker here, along with the fact that I was trying to control both Chris and Sheva at the exact same time, resulted in this fight taking, I'm not exaggerating here, 57 fucking minutes. Almost 1 hour straight of fanning about with this freak, restarting because I ran out of ammo or first aid sprays. Literally everything I tried was useless. At one point I even tried putting him smack bang in the middle of me and Sheva, and to be honest it did work here and there because he would do this jumping spin kick that left him vulnerable to bullets, but I could only do that for so long before he would either kick one of us and knock us away or even just straight up run around Sonic the Hedgehog style. Obviously I'm editing this section to make it look a lot less boring and a lot more viewable, but I really just need to tell you guys that it felt almost impossible in the moment. After about 45 minutes, I almost gave up. It was like 2 a.m. and I was so over it, but of course I persisted, and in the very end we gave him an overdose of the serum and headed to the final location in the game, the volcano. So on the plane towards the volcano, some of you might be aware that there's a QTE cutscene where you have to survive for long enough and eventually knock Wesker out of the plane. During this cutscene, Sheva tries to sacrifice herself as Wesker clings on to her ankle, and you're supposed to press the right buttons to save her, but I didn't realize that you really did have to be quick with the reaction, so I ended up killing Sheva. Sorry, I just felt like leaving that in there. Now, given that the hangar fight took so bloody long and I was very much eager to get this wrapped up and finally go to sleep, I took it upon myself to perform a speedrun trick I had never pulled off before in my life to close this off and finish the game once and for all. You see, when Wesker reveals himself, charges up his spinny tentacle arm and walks towards you, speedrunners like to equip Chris with a rocket launcher to take him out swiftly. But the problem is, it's just not that easy. Wesker can tank rockets like they're nothing, and he pretty much takes next to no damage from them as far as I know. It's pretty much useless shooting it straight at him. That being said, there is a very small window of opportunity somewhere after you separate from Sheva, where Chris can fire a single rocket launcher somewhere at the ground, and if it lands in just the right spot, it literally one-shots Wesker. All the speedrunners do it, it's the fastest way to beat him and finish the game, but my problem is I have no idea where that spot on the ground is. So when I tried to do this, nothing happened. So I tried again and again, and I just wasn't getting it. So I did a bit of research and realized that the world record holder, Fino Mikel, shout out Fino, he used to sit in my Twitch chat when I speedrun the Lost in Nightmares DLC, love that guy. He was aiming his gun at Wesker's left foot and then shooting the rocket so it hits the floor right behind him. So I gave it a go, and when I got onto the platform, he turned me into an airplane, but I wasn't done trying. I gave it another go, trying again and again to make sure I shot it in the right spot, and eventually I did it. I actually one-shot Wesker like the speedrunners do. I was overjoyed. I had never done that before. I was so happy, but also like relieved because I was just so ready to get into bed, knowing that I'd beaten the challenge. Wesker was down, you know, we were on the helicopter ready to leave, and I fucked up. I was so ecstatic for what I'd done that I just completely forgot about the final button prompt to actually kill him in the cutscene, and it sent me back to the beginning of the fight. Honestly, I feel like I deserved that. Anyways, it of course took me another few tries before I finally managed to get the shot right again, and this time it was over for good. Honestly, when I started this challenge, I really didn't think it would be that hard. I mean, I really thought the two would just be running side by side for the entire game, dealing damage at the same time, absolutely eating up the challenge with no problems whatsoever. I didn't even think for a second that there would be instances where they get split up, where one takes damage and is stunned while the other runs on, or turns to face them. I didn't even think about the puzzles where they'd go separate ways, or the long boat rides where my shoot button also drives the boat forward. Looking back on it, this was probably the hardest challenge I've ever done, if you ignore how hard it was to edit this shit. But I finally have an answer to my very important, life-changing question. Can I beat Resident Evil 5 while playing with myself? Yes. Yes, I can. I came, I conquered, and if we're being honest, I think I would like to play with myself again sometime. Not now, and not with the same game, but another day on another game, to see if I could be the one to beat another video game while playing with myself. Thank you.